Hey everyone, welcome to Rewst 103, Jinja Essentials for Workflow Automation. In this course, we're going to talk about the basics of Jinja in Rewst using the Jinja Live Editor. Before we get started, I just wanted to remind everyone that you don't have to go at it alone. We have our Discord channel where you can get help on the fly from our Rock team. We have docs at rewst.help. You can create tickets, come to our Rock open mic on Fridays, and of course, go to calendly.com/clucku to sign up for any other courses we have available. This course is going to be run by Tim Fournette. So without further ado, let's dive right in.
All right, let's go ahead and get started. So today's session is about Jinja. We're going to go over some of the basics, talk about why we use it in Rewst and how to get started using it, and show you a couple of tips and tricks on using it. So getting the most out of the session. We expect that you've gone through our initial onboarding. It's not as important for this session, but also that, we're going to talk a little bit about some light programming. And if you follow along, that may be helpful for you. And we'll get started. So what is Jinja? Jinja is a domain-specific language, meaning it's meant to be used kind of embedded within applications. People typically use it for generating HTML, JSON, XML, or other types of outputs. So you'll see it kind of mixed in with plain text. So an example would be like this: my name is curly first name. It supports basic programming language constructs like loops, conditionals, if statements, things like that. And we use it in Rewst because a lot of times we have to process information. So we may collect information from one environment. Maybe you need to transform it. Maybe, take a first name and last name, add them together to make a full name. And Jinja is really convenient for doing things like that. Some of the basics of like the braces. So when you see Jinja statements, they're typically encapsulated in these different types of little curly brace symbols. Two of the main types are the double curly braces. And we use that whenever we're going to have some sort of output. So whatever's in those will be output out to the field that you're expressing it in. Whenever you see the curly brace with a %, that means that these are some sort of flow control or set actions where we are just doing some code itself that may not output anything. We also have, you can comment with Jinja with curly brace and # or hashtag. And then there's also the dash that you can use within your curly brace operations. If you put a dash at the beginning or the end of the double curlies or the curly %, then that means we'll eliminate the white space that is on that side of the expression. Again, since Jinja is meant to be used within blocks of text typically, sometimes you want to keep the white space that's there, sometimes you don't. And so it lets you control that. The white space meaning stuff like carriage returns, spaces, and tab. And again, another thing is expressions can span multiple lines. So when we open an expression, you can have carriage returns within that before you close it. And that kind of helps with the readability later. A little bit about JSON. JSON we use is typically what we receive whenever we're working with an API or what we send to an API. Things are in key value pairs. It's pretty widely used these days. Any type of communications machine to machine, almost always these days, is JSON. It's pretty much replaced XML and some other formats because it's much more easy to read and structure, makes a lot more sense, easier on the eyes. Here's an example. So basically things are key value pairs, and those key values can cascade down. So we have different types of objects as well. So list objects. So if you look at the friends object in here, you see that this is a list because it's encapsulated in those square brackets. And things are typically encapsulated by single curly brace. Working with variables in Rewst. Variables we use to display some sort of dynamic content. So we can set data in one action in Rewst and then refer back to it in other actions. We also call variables data aliases or context variables. We say context variables because they exist within the context of a workflow, and you'll see the capital CTX at the beginning of the name. So if I were to set a data alias in a task, in this case called today's special, I would refer back to that as ctx.today's special in a future step. Jinja supports if then else type expressions. Here's a few ways that it can be used or expressed. So the simple way, in the first example, we have an if, and then we do some sort of evaluation. So if user is logged in, you're going to do, whatever is on the next line, and then an else, if you want to do something, if that's not the case, and then you're always going to have an end if whenever you do an if this way. There's also an elif that you see on the next example. Elif is just short for else if. So in that case, if x equals 1, and notice how equals, we also use a double equal whenever we're doing a comparison. If we're doing a comparison, it's a double equal. If it's a set operation, it's going to be a single equal. So in this case, if x equals 1, we're going to print this out. Otherwise, if x is 2, we're going to print that out. And then we have an else that is for catching when it's neither case. Another way of doing it is within an output expression. You can, after you define what you want to output, an if can be used right after that to kind of simplify that operation. So in this case, we're going to output x if x is greater than 0. And then you can also use an else in that statement. So, y if y is greater than 10, else output z. All right, to for loops. Very similar to if, same kind of structure. So fors have an end for, just like if has an end if. So fors are used whenever we're going to iterate over lists. So I can say for a thing in a list of things. In this case, we're just going to output the /li, the li tag for in HTML with the word thing and go through it. We can also combine an if with the for loop. So I can say for thing and list of things if the thing is not equal to something, in this case, to output something. Filters are used in Jinja. These are things that either are built in to Jinja or things that we have added ourselves in Rewst. So in a lot of cases, we find that customers are looking to do the same thing. So we'll add functionality to the Jinja environment that we use. Some of the common ones that you may see or use, converting things to upper or lowercase, capitalizing the first letter of an entire string, capitalize every first letter of every word in a string, replacing things, truncating things, a lot of different operations. These are just some examples. And on the bottom, you see some examples of using them. So if you look at the last example, like taking an email address, making sure it's all lowercase, maybe even replacing the @ sign with a space @ to fool the spammers. Some examples of using filters in Jinja. So again, on Rewst, we have added some quality of life improvements to our environment. One is Jinja is written in Python. This Jinja syntax is very much like Python. So if you've used Python before, you should be somewhat comfortable. One thing Python has that's kind of cool is list comprehension, they call it. And we've added the ability to do list comprehension in output expressions. And so here's an example of that. In this case, this is iterating. This is a list. So as you can see, as with the square brackets, we're going to iterate over the list and output the ID of each item in that list, but only if the item, being a user object in this case, has its enabled flag being true. So we'll go over a little bit more of that in a minute. And some other custom filters that we've created, some base64 operations, flatten ability, converting things to or from JSON strings, and JSON path query. I'll show you a little bit about that as well in our demo. Editing code in Rewst, we use a Monaco editor, which is very similar to Visual Studio Code if you've used that before. It's basically the same engine. It doesn't have all of the features of it, but It does do the keystrokes and some of the shortcuts that you have in Monaco. A little link here if you want to look at tips and tricks on using VS Code. A lot of these will transfer over to the editor that we have in Rewst as well. So we're going to look at some samples today. The JSON object, I know this is probably impossible to read, but that's okay. We're going to pull this up in the live editor. But we're going to play with a menu that's, just kind of randomly generated lunch menu that's expressed as a JSON object. So let's go ahead and jump into that. So what I've done here is taken that JSON object and it's saved in my live editor here. So if we look at our lunch menu, we have a week's worth of lunch starting on Monday, April 4th, and I can actually collapse each of the days in this. And so our JSON object has the days as a list of days and the things that are happening for each day. It has a week attribute. So, I can do something like when I express all of our context variables, I can do that. I can just express that out. And if I hit Control Enter in my live editor, we'll see that we have all of our data in here. So I can see that my days for Monday, again, my days is a list. I can see that with a square bracket. The day for Monday has a date attribute. It's got a lunch attribute that has all of the things we're going to have for lunch. It's got the weather. So we have the weather forecast for this day. And then it goes on day by day. Little shortcut here with the live editor or anything Monaco is I can press Control / and either comment or uncomment blocks of code. So if I now want to look at the week, I can see that we're pulling out the value for the week just by expressing ctx.week. So let's go through and kind of play with the data a little bit. So if I want to look at the days and see how many days are there in this schedule, I can do ctx.days, pass this to the length filter. Length will get the number of items in a list or in a string. If it's a string, it'll show you how many characters are in it because a string technically is a list of characters. It's, we're getting the list of the string of items in here. So this is our week of 5 days. So I get a result of 5 here. So let's get a little bit more in depth with this. So if I want to see what's for dessert this week, if I look at each day, I see that the lunch attribute in here has an attribute for the dessert. But I wanted to see only the dessert for each day. So what I can do is I can loop through those items. And so my days is a list, remember? So what I'll do is I will do for weekday in days, weekday being just a word that I'm making up to keep track of which iteration I'm at in the list. We're going to output a sentence that says the dessert on the weekday.day, again, the day is the attribute in here, is the weekdays, lunches, dessert. So if I run this, I'll get a string output that is just a sentence, again, for each day of the week. In fact, I can even should have put a period here to complete the sentence. So this is our output. So let's look at other ways of doing the same thing. So in this case, talked about how we added list comprehension to the Jinja environment that we use. And so this is an example of doing that. So this is basically going to do the same thing. Well, we're going to build a list that is the dessert on weekday.day is weekday.lunch.dessert for weekday in ctx.days. So we've kind of flipped the syntax over itself, but the idea is the same. We're going to output a thing for each thing in a list. So and I'm calling the thing the same thing, a weekday. My list is ctx.days. So if I run this, I see that I get these sentences, but it's a little bit different because what I've done here is my output using list comprehension is going to be not just a bunch of text, but it's going to be an actual list. So in some cases, you want to output your stuff directly to a string. Sometimes you want to process this in different ways later on. Now, if I did want to stick with list comprehension, but make it output the same way using, and give us a bunch of text again, what I can do is I can join these elements in the list together using the filter called join. So filters are called first with the pipe character. And so I'm going to use the join filter. But I see here in the join, it wants a delimiter. So I'm going to give it a delimiter of period and then a \n, which would be a new line. So now if I run this, I'll get something similar to before. So now I have a complete sentence that says the same as before. The dessert, the dessert. So let's look at something that's a little bit different. If I'm looking instead of the dessert, I want to look at the sides. The sides here are a list. So if I were to do an output and say I want to see all the sides for each day, since each day's sides is its own list, I end up with this list of lists, which could be useful, could be what I want, but maybe I don't want it as a list of lists. I want just to have all these sides in a single list because I want to know just what all the sides are for the week. I can use the flatten filter. In fact, you know what? Instead of doing it this way, I'm going to uncomment this and show you guys. So back to the list of lists, I'm going to just type in flatten and see that now we have a flat list. But if I just wanted to get a list of all the sides, maybe I'm doing the shopping for the week and I need to know what to buy. But I see that we have sweet potato fries listed twice. Don't necessarily want to do that. So I could use the unique filter, and that would then remove any duplicates. And then say I also wanted to alphabetize it. I can sort that. And so now my list of sides is alphabetized. And so we see here that we can take filters and just continue to pile one on top of the other. Another way of doing this, so I can run all of this as a single simple query using JSON path query filter that we put into Rewst. So let me run this and you'll see how it looks. In fact, it looks exactly like the output before because I'm still running it through that sort and unique filter. But so again, this is our flat list. So what JSON path query does is it lets you, it's a kind of a special library that we use that lets you refer to JSON objects in a strange way, a kind of cool dynamic way. When you refer to that with a list, you can use star to get all the items in a list. So what we're doing is we're pulling all the days, lunch sides, and all of the sides. So if I were to pull off this part, I'd end up back with that list. So by piping or encapsulating the asterisk here, whoops, too many characters. Oh yeah, star. We get back to a version of that list that is simple and flat. There's another way to do this too. I can do ctx.days and select attribute. And that's going to be the sides. What are lunch.sides? Oh, wait, that's the map. There we go. The map filter, which is built into Jinja, will pull me the lunch.sides, and then I can do other things like flatten it again. The list, actually. Yeah. So if whenever we use the map filter, we need to use the list filter after that to convert that to a actual list, and then we can flatten. Then I can still do my sort and unique. So let's get a little bit more in depth here. So here's a dilemma. I'm lactose intolerant. On which days should I bring my own beverage? So let's look at that. And so what I can do is I can use my list comprehension. I can get the day of the week for every weekday in the days if the drink is milk. So if I look at that, I see Monday. So then I'm going to look at this list and say, okay, let's verify that this is correct. Let's look at the drinks here. Okay, I got apple juice on Tuesday. Wednesday, we're drinking water. Thursday, it's orange juice, no big deal. Friday, oh, our drink is chocolate milk. So that logic's no good. So we can get a little bit fancier with this. So, you try to trick me, there's chocolate milk. Chocolate milk has milk in it. So now what I can do is instead of just saying if the drink equals milk and doing a direct comparison, I'm going to take the drink. I'm going to pipe it to lowercase also because just in case it's in lowercase, I'm going to feed it lowercase. But what this is going to do is take the entire string of the drink and check to see if milk is in that string. So we're going to check for this sequence of characters within the sequence of characters that is the drink. So if I do that, let it run. Now I see that we have Monday and Friday. And what I can do is lunch.drink. If I want to see what those drinks are, didn't backspace enough. Lunch.drink. So I can look at all the drinks that are on these days. I can see milk and chocolate milk. We can combine these better. We can say, so this is going to output a variable, weekday to lunch.drink. If I want to add strings to this, I can use the tilde character, which is string concatenation. I can say will be served on weekday.day. Run that. And now I can see how milk will be served on Monday, chocolate milk will be served on Friday. And again, if I wanted to, instead of having this be a list of strings, make this an actual string, I can use the join operator and say, what if I just, instead of making these new lines, I'll just put the word and in between it. Now it says milk will be served on Monday and chocolate milk will be served on Friday. This is an example. Basically, we're going to kind of do the same thing, but we're going to combine some of the ideas here. We're going to first build a list of days. This is going to build a list of days that have milk in the drink. And then I'm going to, in another command, loop through each of those days and output on here. So if I were to run this, take out my errant string here. Now it says on Monday, you should bring a Frosty Roosty Cola for lunch. It's also going to say what time lunch is because they are serving milk. Now we're also lowercasing it just to help with the grammar here. We also have weather objects in here. And what's interesting about these is they kind of have a different data format. We've got our weather conditions, which is just a description. We've got our wind speed, our temperature, and wind direction. So here's a weird case. I like to leave my window open on the west side of my house unless it might rain and the wind blows from that side. So I'm looking for which direction the wind is going to blow from and whether or not it's going to rain. And I want to know which days that those are going to be. So let's uncomment this and see how we wrote that. So I'm writing a sentence here on the days. And so I have my list here. I'm going to join it by the word and. So and what I'm going to do is iterate this over the weekday in ctx.days again. So I'm going to output the day for each weekday. We've got an if conditional here, which means that we need to match the conditions that are in here. So the first condition that I have written in here is if west is in the weather's wind direction. Notice I didn't go with equals west because with the winds blowing from the southwest, it's still a problem. And either rain is in the conditions or storm is in the conditions. So if we run this, it's going to output on Tuesday and Friday, you will need to close the darn windows. So this join command is how we are able to get this separated by the word and. But what if there was only one such condition? Let's see if we can make that happen. East isn't there, north maybe. Yeah, so Wednesday is the only day that the wind will blow from the north and have rain or storm. So on Wednesday, you'll need to close the windows. But notice how we didn't even have an and word come up because only one item was in the list. It didn't have to join it. So let's go a little bit deeper. Say something like, I get cold unless the temperature is over 65 degrees. Which days do I need a jacket? Also, for some reason, I want the answer in JSON because I want to show you guys how we output JSON objects. So if I uncomment this, what we see is we have our list, our Jinja list comprehension, which is great for outputting JSON. I'm going to build a list of things that are going to be encapsulated by these single curly braces. So I still have my for weekday in ctx.days. I still have my conditional. In this case, it is if the weather temperature is less than or equal to 65. But my object is going to have a day object and a temp object. And it's going to have the day object is going to show the name of the day. The temp object is going to have the temperature. So if I run that, I have too many empty strings here. Again, I need that dash to get rid of white space. Let's see if I can make that happen. You know what? I'm going to just delete all this because I have way too much white space. There we go. So now we have a JSON object as a result. And it starts off as a list. And for each day in here, we have the attributes. If I wanted to add attributes to this, I can say I want the lunch. Weekday.lunch. And it just adds that lunch attribute to each of the days. Say I only wanted the time for lunch. You can say the weekday.lunch time. I can call this lunchtime and have the day, the temperature, and what time lunch is. So the last thing I want to show is just kind of a reminder that we don't have to output just in flat strings or just in Jinja. We can output HTML. So I can build an entire HTML document. I could also do this with Markdown or any other kind of format available. And I'm going to kind of go through all the data that we have. So I want an HTML table of the menu and the weather. So we have a title for the entire document. I've got a body. I do some style stuff, show how I want it to look. I can open up my body. I can say that we have our menu, and then within the HTML document, I can put my Jinja loop conditionals. So I'm going to loop over the day in CDX days. I'm going to output as the heading for that day, the day and date. Show what time the lunch is, what our entree is, and a table, what we're going to have. Also have our weather in here. So if I run this, I've output some HTML. So I'm going to copy this. I'm just going to open up Notepad, paste this in. I know you can't see it. I'm going to save as Jinja to html.html in my documents folder. Now I can open the file. I call this Jinja to html.html. And here's some HTML that Rewst has generated for me. Now, I did cheat. What I did was I had ChatGPT first that generated the lunch menu for me, and then I told it to generate me Jinja string to make a nice looking HTML table of all the data. So it took the objects, generated all this HTML because I am not this creative, not nearly creative enough to create an HTML document, and gave me the code to do so. And so when it outputs, it actually, the interpreter runs, it does all the looping, passes all the data in, generates HTML to give me the daily lunch. You can also play with it. You can have conversations with ChatGPT and tell it your color scheme and your favorite fonts and things, and it'll do that for you.
Thanks, Tim. Before everyone goes, we just wanted to remind you of some additional helpful resources that you have access to, including Rewst Help Docs, official Jinja documentation, ChatGPT, of course, and others. So feel free to take a look. And as always, thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.